expecting anyone else?
My daughter texted me, she said, "Oh, Mom."
What you need to see, yeah.
All right, I think we are okay.
Sure.
Yeah. He should. Just sent me a text.
Is she running in? or-
No, she's not coming. She just sent me a text.
Oh, okay.
Okay, come on, you can do your thing.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Dr. Danielle Lyman Torres, and I am Laretha's committee chair for her dissertation. This is Dr. Ryder. She is her committee member. We make up her dissertation committee. And we've had the privilege of working with her over the last 3 years on,
Two.
well, almost 3. Almost 3 years on her project here. Obviously culminating with today, and you are all here to support her, and this is fantastic. And for all of those of you online, hello to you as well. Just a few things, just a few housekeeping things, if you could please silence your phones. I know you might think you have, but there's usually someone that still rings, so if you could please, Jeff, do that. I just don't want any distractions for her. This is one of those times where you wanna be focused. So, how things will go today is, Laretha will present, to us for 30 minutes. We will not interrupt her during that time, so please just smile and nod, at her, kindly. We will not interrupt her during that time. She will present. Following that presentation, her committee will ask her, you have someone to admit. Her committee will ask her questions. Unfortunately, only we can ask her questions. If you have questions, you'll have to ask her at the celebration. We will ask her questions.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
See, she turned on. I told you, every time. I told you every time. But we will ask her questions. Following that question period, she will then be free to talk with all of you while her committee, leaves to deliberate on the presentation. We will return with an answer. I've talked with Laretha, she says you can all stay for that part. And so, really exciting day. That's how it will go. So just so you kind of know how the day, will work. But again, appreciate you being here and in supporting, Laretha. So without further ado, whenever you are ready, the floor will be
I didn't
yours.
get a hug from you yet, so.
Do you want it before or after? Before and after. Absolutely. Oh, Zeke, somebody coming in. Oh. Hi.
Hi, I'm sorry, I was just checking in for time.
Oh, thank you for checking.
I think we're good. We're actually just getting ready to start.
Okay, sorry, I didn't.
No, you're good.
No, you're fine.
You made it just in time.
If ever that clicker doesn't respond,
We
if you just
fixed it.
click with your mouse again, it should wake it back up. The only thing I can think of.
We got it.
We got
Okay,
it.
cool, all right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, have a good one.
You too. Okay. Do you know that there's people in the waiting room?
No, I didn't.
Hi.
I told them if they didn't join by 1, they weren't getting in.
Okay, your
So
choice.
this gonna be it.
Okay.
They already know. So let me see here. This fine. Her AI. Note taking. All right, that's it. Okay, let's do this. So good afternoon, Dr. Lyman Torres and Dr. Ryder. To my family, my friends, my cohort members who are joining online, thank you. Thank you very much for being here today. My name, as you all know, is Laretha J. McCullough. I'm here to present my dissertation. It's an examination of how Black clergy leaders support long-term trauma in the Black community. As a victim and survivor, of childhood trauma, this topic is very close and near to my heart. Although I was resilient, I have relatives who struggle daily with mental health challenges. Hold on, I have to put it back on there.
Again.
Yeah. All right. So before we move forward, I just want to acknowledge a few individuals. My mom. I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity to acknowledge this woman. It's because of her that I'm able to stand here today. She inspired me to do this. She always voiced the importance of education. And before she passed, she was actually in school. And she got sick. She was working on her bachelor's in theology. She got sick. And it was her dream to go back to school to finish up that degree. But she couldn't make it. She didn't make it. So I'm doing this in her honor. To my children and my grandchildren, I love you all dearly to infinity and beyond. And I want you to remember that you are capable of achieving anything that you set your mind and your hearts to. My committee, thank you. I could not have asked for a better team to get me through this process. Thank you. I don't know why I let y'all take me here. Goodness gracious. Okay. Here's the agenda. I'm not going to read all this stuff. You can read, but we're going to go through every single one of these items today. So I want to start with trauma. You know, I talked about how Black clergy leaders support trauma, the long-term impact of trauma. And what I want to do is I want to start with trauma. So what is trauma? Trauma, hang on 1 second, I'm sorry. So trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event that results in denial and shock. There are longer term reactions that include unpredictable emotions, as well as flashbacks, strained relationships, and physical symptoms. And that's according to American Psychological Association. There are 3 types of trauma. You have acute, which is a single instance. You have chronic, which is repeated and prolonged. And then you have complex, which is very multiple traumatic events. And as you can see here, there are numerous consequences of trauma. You have, again, behavioral, you got emotional, and you got physical. So you can see here, get my pointer. You can see here for behavioral, we talked about strained relationships, your interpersonal conflicts. You have physical, that's chronic pain, chronic fatigue and exhaustion, and then emotional. All right, so I just wanted to point that out because that'll be important as we go through. All right, so now let's talk about how trauma affects Black people. I just want to say that prior to coming here today, I watched 3 episodes of Roots. I don't know why I did that, but I watched 3 episodes. And so we want to talk about, again, how trauma affects the Black community. And it starts back with historical. You have that historical and intergenerational trauma that have plagued us for over 400 years. Over 400 years. That dates back to chattel slavery, where you had people who were treated as property. You had the Jim Crow laws, where you had segregation. And then you have post-civil rights, which is where we are today. We are still dealing with issues today. You still have, police brutality. You have mass incarceration. You have redlining that's still going on. You also have gentrification that's going on as well. So we're still dealing with it. Now, what's important to note here is that in 1998, the CDC partnered with Kaiser Permanente, and they conducted one of the largest studies that was focused on child abuse, neglect, and household challenges. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to point to the slide here. Oops, wrong one. The slide here on adverse childhood experiences. So this is what came out of that study. And so an adverse childhood experience is a traumatic event that has negative long-term implications. Long-term implications as you become an adult. So as you can also see here, and I want to go back to say it's from birth up through the age of 18, because that's important to know, all right? So what you see here is these are the 3 areas that they focused on: abuse, you got emotional, physical, and sexual, you got household challenges, domestic, substance, mental, etc. And then you have neglect, emotional and physical. And for these ACEs, what they're saying here is that the majority of individuals have either a emotional neglect or substance abuse. Those are the 2 that and physical as well, that are most prevalent, all right? You can also see here that 67% of the population, they have at least one ACE. This up here talks about 4 more ACEs and how it can impact you as an adult. You have substance abuse, you have, mental issues, depression, you can have lung issues, liver issues, etc. But I think what's most important down here is people that have more than 6 ACEs will die at least 20 years earlier than anybody that does not. Okay? The pyramid here is the lifespan. So it just talks about ACEs, and the more you have and the impact of it, early death. All right? So my problem statement here, the problem statement, given the fact that you have Black and African American individuals have the greatest prevalence of ACEs, 58.8%, as you'll see here. So the issue is, we know that due to research, it tells us that African Americans have a greater severity of untreated mental health disorders than any other racial or ethnic group. We also know, based on research, that us as Black people, we don't use mental health services like others, like some of the other races. All right? And then research has also further told us that Black people prefer religious coping instead. So with that being said, you have clergy leaders who are considered the first responders, and in most cases, they're the only responder to those who are seeking assistance with mental health challenges. So the problem is, there may be a gap in the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities of those clergy leaders. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that they have the tools that they need to effectively give sound advice and counsel to those who seek them out. Purpose of this study is to examine what progress can be made to transform the mindset of Black people, to encourage them that as they have these types of situations, that they go out and seek the help that they need. We also want to highlight scalable practices and strategies that promote healthy outcomes and break these generational patterns. And then lastly, as I just stated, we want to make sure that Black clergy leaders are adequately prepared to give that advice and counsel. So the research question, how prepared would Black clergy leaders describe themselves when it comes to possessing the knowledge, skills, and abilities to effectively give advice and counsel to congregants with mental health needs? And so what you see here is what we call a mental health literacy scale or chart. And this flow chart, I'll call it, basically talks about all of the components that go into mental health literacy. It starts with recognition. So do they have the ability to recognize specific disorders? This is clergy that we're talking about. Do they know how to seek information? And you'll all see that, you'll hear that as I continue on. Do they know what causes mental illnesses? Do they even know what a mental illness is? And what is their attitude? Do they believe that religious coping is what's preferred, or not necessarily what's preferred, but what's needed or what's better, whatever? Do they understand that? Do they understand the importance of helping individuals get the support that they need? So here's the theoretical framework that we're using here, and this is the transformational leadership model. I won't go into all of this, we're gonna come back to it towards the end. But this here, this framework, I felt was the appropriate framework to use because as you can see, you have leaders and followers make each other advance to a higher level of moral motivation. And clergy are considered trusted advisors. They're considered to be confidants. Their congregants respect them for the most part. And so they go to them to seek out insight. So we're using this because, again, it's a highly effective leadership style that can improve on motivation, engagement, creativity, and innovation, as well as the end goal in terms of performance. So my literature review, this was a daunting task. When I started out searching for articles, I came across, and I think I started out with just mental health, 227,000 articles. Now you all know I wasn't gonna go through all of that. So what I did was I started to peel it back, and I drilled in and I got to mental illness, mental health condition, clergy, Black clergy, so on and so forth, and was able to get it down to around 7,000 articles. And so I looked at skimming them. I looked at about 200. I got to 200 or so. And of those, I started to go through to identify those that were more applicable to the study here. And so what you'll see is you'll see these buckets in green. This is what I came up with as part of that process. You'll see here in the center, mental health literacy and clergy preparedness in the Black church. That's what we're focused on. So looking at mental illness in Black Americans, there was a study that talked about the lower educational attainment and income. It talked about the social disadvantage of those individuals. It also talked about high homelessness rates, which we can attest to here. And then those that had a serious mental health issue or illness, they longed for more participation in community-based activities. So they wanted to feel accepted rather than feeling a sense of isolation. Barriers to treatment was another category here. And there were several, articles that I came across there, but the cultural aspect, fear of discrimination. We all know what that feels like. Stigmatization, fears of being labeled crazy, dangerous, lazy, weak, all of that. And then you had mistrust of healthcare providers. And I'm going to show you a brief video when we get further ahead. We also talked about or came across inadequate access to care. And then we just talked about mental health literacy and what that looks like. And then COVID-19 and mental illness, inequities induced by systemic racism, biased information, misinformation. When we think about COVID, we all know somebody in here, everybody in here can identify a person that they lost, whether they knew them directly or indirectly due to COVID. And a lot of it had to do with misinformation, particularly in the Black community. I almost lost my brother to COVID. So I know, I'm speaking from experience, almost lost him. The Black church. It was viewed as a place of refuge and healing. People felt that they could go there for spiritual guidance. Talked about them being first responders, trusted advisors, and so on and so forth. Then you got religion and mental health, gatekeepers for mental health, preferred coping, that was the preferred coping mechanism. And then clergy preparedness, they're viewed as role models for mental health, and there's lack of knowledge, publicly available resources. So the research methodology, I'm gonna slow down because now I'm getting to my transcendental phenomenological research methodology. That was a mouthful. So this methodology highlights participants' lived experience, and they capture, things that they've gone through. So this is them. This is their experience. And it's both what they did, what they experienced, how they experienced it. And then the other thing for me was I have my own preconceived notions because growing up in a Christian home, we were taught, number one, what's said here stays here. Any issues that you have, you take it to the Lord in prayer. You get on your knees, you tarry, you pray all that. So with that being said, I had to make sure that I removed all of that. And my committee had to keep reminding me early on. So started out with this, 25,000 churches in the United States, approximately. There are approximately more than 250 situated in upstate New York. For purposes of this study, a Black church is defined as a religious place of worship where most or all of the attendees are Black, all right? And then the other piece of this is, it has historically been known that there are 7 denominations that comprise the Black church. This process took place in the location of those that were interviewed. Meet my study participants. So I interviewed 10 individuals. In order for them to have been qualified or eligible, they had to be Black or of African American descent. They had to have been ordained for at least 2 years. They had to be at least 18 years of age. They had to reside in upstate New York. And they also had to be an elder, a pastor, a bishop, a clergy leader. All right. Oh, let me go back. And you'll see here, these are not their real names. I had to apply a pseudonym to protect their identity. And they did go through the process of, consenting to participate. We cleared all that up. The other piece that I'd like to make sure you all understand is I had to take notes as well as audio recordings. So I yielded, I want to say 126 pages of notes when it was all said and done. Rigorous process. This is just another view of the previous slide, and I just wanted to talk to the ones that are starred. So the first one, you'll see there were 3 deacons, 2 bishops, and 5 pastors, which I thought was interesting. Their ages, the age groupings, you'll see that here. So I had nobody that was less than 45. Everybody was 45 or older. And then in terms of gender, the majority, 80% were men. So the data analysis process. This was monotonous. So I talked about the fact that I had 126 pages of information. I went through again, and went through probably 5 or 6 more times, each of those interviews. I had to go back, listen to the audio multiple times to make sure that what I captured was reflective of what they actually told me. So went in, and there were some folks who were talking and they just talked and talked and talked that had nothing to do with this. So I had to extract all of that out, had to take all of that out because it wasn't relevant. So once I did all of that, then I focused on key words, key sentences, key statements. All right, took that and then came up with themes. All right, so we got some themes for you. So there were 3 things that came out of this. The first one is mental health literacy is vital, and there were 2 sub-themes, making sure that they had a foundational understanding as well as ongoing professional development. Religious coping alone is insufficient. It wasn't enough. And so they had 2 sub-themes from there, religious as a coping mechanism, and then also stigma associated with mental illness. And then the last thing, collaboration between clergy and mental health professionals is essential. So as I go through, you'll kind of see some of where I'm going, but there were several people that talked about the church being just more than the 4 walls. And they also talked about strong partnerships mattering. Okay, so here is the next 3 slides actually, based on the themes. When I asked each participant to describe their training experience, this is what they shared. So I'm going to highlight the ones with the stars. And the first one was interesting to me. What is the indicator that you need to pass them on to someone else for more in-depth assistance? That was profound. So as a clergy who's respected and that these congregants are relying on, this was a question. That's concerning. Another one, I must assess myself before I feel I can give sound advice or counsel. Again, interesting. This one here, just because you carry the title of a pastor doesn't mean you have it all together. Our pastor gave 0 training because he was old school. Oftentimes, church leadership isn't experienced enough to provide what congregants are seeking. And then the last one, in the Pentecostal experience, everything was identified as a demonic spirit or the person being labeled as demon possessed. So when you think about individuals seeking support from the church, these are concerns because this is coming from clergy leaders. Religious coping alone is insufficient. The first one, a lot of ministers' mentality is we can handle it in the church, but a lot of people can't. A lot of people have church hurt. That one was deep. When I asked that individual to elaborate, they talked about the fact that you had sexual abuse in the church that nobody wanted to get out of the church. So people don't really go to church because of these types of situations. And then I think some pastors need therapy themselves. Well, a lot of them talked about that as well. You got to get to the root problem to prevent it from occurring again. And again, this one was right on point. Right on point. And And then professional help is much needed, prayer helps, but go to the doctor. This one was interesting because what they talked about in that particular instance was they gave the analogy that when you're in pain, so if you have physical pain, you're more likely to go get support. You're gonna go seek out a doctor. But when you have mental issues, you're less likely to do that. And so in this case, they were saying, just like you have physical, mental should be treated the same. Go get the help you need. And then lastly, historical religion was the answer. You just give it to the Lord. You just gotta pray hard and touch and agree. And then collaboration with mental health professionals is essential. They were asked to express, the participants expressed the need for collaboration between clergy and mental health professionals. There was a lot of conversation around this. So we don't have all the solutions in our house, and the church is more than the four walls. So they talked about not only collaborating with the mental health professionals, but also with other organizations. Because someone had made mention, not everything is mental health. So when people come to the church, they need more than, guidance and counseling around mental health. They may need money, they may need a place to stay, they may need food, so there are other things. An individual said, I know not to operate outside of my expertise. So I often refer parishioners to trained counselors or therapists. And this particular individual, they have a church program. So they have a mental health program within their church. So that individual may mention that whenever they have conversations with congregants, they bring a social worker in or a clinical therapist. They will bring them in. And then similarly, I don't feel like I have the complete package to be able to serve people entirely. This individual talked about recommending, even though there's conversations that are had with individuals who don't think they may need support, he always closed it out with, I have a Christian mental health therapist that I think you should talk to. Because he said he just didn't want to leave the chance. And then the last one, we're not called to diagnose. We're not called to condemn. We must allow the experts to do what they're skilled to do. That's why they're the experts. So the discussion, we talked about trauma. It's a societal issue. We talked about historical and intergenerational impact that's still present. We looked at consequences from that chart earlier on. Emotional, physical, and behavioral issues. The Black community in ACEs, 67% of the population, we know have at least one ACE. We talked about people having more than 6 and what can happen there. And then we also talked about, the emotional neglect, physical abuse, and substance abuse. Barriers to care, stigmatization, only 1 in 3 will seek treatment. Inadequate access, you got health insurance or lack of. You got maybe no culturally sensitive therapists who can relate to what we as Black people deal with. And then you have mistrust of the healthcare system. And I want to play this video, but before I do that, I want to finish this out. So mental health literacy among Black people or Black clergy, and that's more around effective pastoral care. So if they are equipped, they can provide what's needed to help these people get the support they need. We want to make sure that doing so strengthens the mental well-being of the Black community. And then we want to mitigate potential emotional fatigue of clergy as well. Because again, as somebody said earlier, a few of them said it earlier, they deal with their own mental health issues. So you can't pour from an empty cup. If you're not whole, then you can't help others. So let me do this.
I put forward and I maintain, if I was white, I wouldn't have to go through that. At that time, I'd only received 2 treatments of the remdesivir. He said, you don't need it. You're not even short of breath. I said, yes, I am. He further stated, you should just go home right now, and I don't feel comfortable giving you any more narcotics. I was in so much pain from my neck. My neck hurt so bad. He made me feel like I was a drug addict, and he knew I was a physician. This is how Black people get killed. When you send them home and they don't know how to fight for themselves.
I wanted to show that.
There's a reason Chevy is called.
I talked about earlier, and I got my notes in here also. But I talked about earlier how Black people are treated differently. 2002, I had a blood clot in the back of my leg. And following that, well, they didn't even know how I survived it. I walked in there, they didn't even know how I was living. But following that, I had to have multiple treatments. And this lady right here, Joanne, I was working with her at the time, and she was the one that told me, go back to the doctor because something was wrong. Couldn't walk that day. And what they told me was, they said, you need to take beta blockers because you have mitral valve prolapse. And I'm not one to take medication. I'm not taking anybody's meds unless I'm dying and I need to. And so I refused treatment. I said, I'm not doing that. I just won't do it. We settled in on, me taking some antibiotics before I went to the dentist, but other than that, I would not take them. That was 23 years ago. I'm still here. So again, when I think back at that, they didn't really understand what was going on with me. They would have had me taking something that I didn't need. So I just wanted to share that. So again, the alignment to transformational leadership theory, we came back full circle. The only thing I'm gonna point out here, you all can read all of this, but because we talked about clergy and their role and how they support are supposed to be supporting the community. But here's what it is. Black clergy leaders demonstrate transformational leadership attributes by inspiring healing and fostering hope in marginalized communities that have been historically affected by trauma and systemic racism and discrimination. That's it in a nutshell. Limitations to the study, there were a few different limitations. When you think about the context, the geographical scope, it was limited to upstate New York. So, had it been outside of it broader, and the results may have been a little bit different. Also have the age, as I mentioned earlier, nobody was under the age of 45. So if I had input from individuals under the age of 45, would that have yielded a different outcome? The other piece of it is the complexity of trauma may extend beyond what pastors are able to do. Implication, this study adds to the body of knowledge of Black clergy's lived experience, more so around mental health literacy. It facilitates strategies for early intervention and referrals. Referrals is important. It may help to reduce and hopefully eliminate the stigma associated with formal psychotherapy. Doing this, encouraging open conversations, letting people know that it's okay to not be okay. And shifting those cultural beliefs and attitudes away from that. So people don't feel, they're not made to feel that they're less of because they need to go sit on somebody's couch. And then it also would offer a holistic pastoral care approach where they can give both spiritual guidance and psychological support. Or at least refer them. So recommendations for future research or further examination of strategies to incorporate mental health literacy into seminary and theological school, okay, into their curriculum. Because right now, each of these people, when I asked them, 2 individuals said that they had some training, but it was like a course. And it wasn't specific to mental health literacy per se. They touched on it, but there wasn't anything that covers what they're faced with on a regular basis. They need to be focused on suicide prevention, trauma informed, and some of these others. How do you recognize anxiety and depression? What is anxiety and depression? Bipolar disorder, etc. We talked about the geographical scope, but what I didn't mention was the denomination. So there was Baptist, there was Pentecostal, and then there was non-denominational. So if I had gotten, I don't know, CME or AME, if that would have made a difference as well. Talked about the age and then the gender. So with gender, we had 80% male participation. If it was all female, would that have resulted in a different outcome? And then recommendations for Black clergy leaders. We need them to advocate. They need to be out here advocating for the inclusion of mental health education into seminary schools. They're the ones going, well, some of them, because a lot of them didn't go. That's a whole nother topic though. So that's what they need to be doing. And then engaging in ongoing professional development. So this is not a one and done. It should be ongoing and evergreen. Mental health is broad, it's dynamic. Seeking out and sharing mental health resources. I ask questions about, do you have anything on your bulletin board? We don't have a bulletin board. You might need to consider one. So sharing, post it to your website. And then religious coping is insufficient, employing strategies to eliminate the stigma. So promoting where they can see that faith and therapy can coexist. Right? And then hosting joint workshops where you have clergy and the mental health professionals coming together, working in partnership with one another. And I just had this in here. This is just something that I had put together. I won't go to that other website thing. I have handouts, I'll give you that. But I wanted you all to see the statistics, so I'll hand that out. But this is basic information that anybody should be able to go to the web and pull. But some of these clergy that I talked to, they had no idea. And then the collaborative efforts. So they need to take them intentional steps to build those alliances with those that can support and provide the healing or the insight, the guidance to those individuals who are struggling. Training mental health practitioners so they can come together. Hosting, again, workshops at the church, doing seminars and things like that. Oh, I lost my button. Doing things like that, that again, show the parishioners that they can coexist. This can work. And then taking advantage of opportunities to host peer-led roundtables. So one of the things here I thought was interesting, they talked about getting together and meeting with, a collective group of clergy. And so when I asked questions about, so what do you all talk about? Well, we talk about a lot of stuff. Okay, but then it was still asking a lot of questions. Well, where do I find this? And how do I do this? And well, so then you all should be talking collectively together. So taking advantage of those opportunities to share best practices. So here are the societal benefits of mental health literacy in our Black community. We talked a little bit about early intervention. So if they're literate, they can guide as appropriately. Promoting faith in therapy helps to minimize or normalize mental health in our marginalized communities. And then we talked about trauma-informed care as well. We want to make sure that they're trained because that can strengthen the resilience in those communities. Cultivating those strong partnerships with the mental health practitioners, we talked about that as well. And then having culturally informed mental health providers. So I mentioned earlier where they don't necessarily have a lot of us, people that look like us. So if I'm struggling with an issue, I may not go to, a white man or a white woman because they may not be able to relate to me. I would prefer to have someone who may be able to relate more to me. And then sustainable clergy leadership associations. So those peer-led forums. So conclusion, we know that mental health continues to be a growing issue in the Black community. COVID-19 exacerbated that situation. This study confirmed that mental health literacy is vital. Religious coping alone is not enough. And collaboration between mental health professionals is essential. We also learned, my belief is that Black clergy leaders exemplify transformational leadership attributes and are highly effective in influencing, motivating, stimulating, and providing individualized considerations to those who seek them out. That's it. I know.
Okay, so breathe first, breathe.
I moved so much, I lost my butt.
At least you found it, I didn't see it, so I'm gonna tell you where it was. Okay. All right, at this time, the committee will ask you some questions. Discuss with you, you good?
Yeah.
Begin? Okay.
I do, yes.
Okay.
Okay. When you mentioned the AIDS study, there's 17,000 participants in that study.
Yes.
You mentioned that the ACEs 6 or above determines length of life. I think the only thing I would encourage you to put in that is that that's without intervention of any kind.
Yes, without intervention.
Okay.
In other words, it's not a foregone conclusion.
Correct.
In your problem statement, you lead us to the fact that, Black people prefer religious coping. How did the church, just briefly, how did the church become the place that Black people go? How did that become the place?
So it goes back to slavery. The church was viewed as a place of refuge. So when individuals were struggling, dealing with, all of the trauma that they were dealing with, that's where they went. That's where they went. They went as a place of hope. Now, interestingly enough, for what it's worth, I was looking at the Jim Crow Museum the other day and came across an interesting fact where the preachers back then actually preached to the individuals to say, this is the will of the Lord. So the will of the Lord wants us to go through what we're going through. And so they had people thinking, yeah, this is it. That wasn't it. Thank you.
Part of the, preparation for clergy is recognition, ability to recognize the disorder, but they can't diagnose. So, my question to you is, could you tell within your research, how they were coming up with levels of diagnoses for the things that they discussed with you without being able to do that?
Yes. So we actually talked about this a little bit. It was concerning, actually, to me, because just listening to them, some of them, one of the questions was, are you able to give, what type of advice or counseling are you able to give? Is it spiritual? Is it formal, or what have you? There were a few people that said they could give formal, but those people didn't even have experience to give, they had no training. So again, they have no idea of what it actually means to be formal versus, so no, this was just through their experience from their own perspective.
Yeah, I have a similar question in that same vein around your study participants. Because you did have 3 participants who had training in mental health in some form, background. What was the difference between talking to those participants and then talking to the other participants that had not had any training?
The conversations with them were more in-depth as opposed to the others just being surface level. So they actually were able to get into, one individual talked about, phone numbers, I won't quote the number, but talked about phone numbers, I encourage my folks to call such and such and such and such, to get the help that you need. They talked about Willow Domestic Violence Center, for example, for battered women. They talked about a number of different things, food shelters, pantries, all of that. So you could clearly see the difference between those who had the training versus those who didn't. Because a lot of those, one individual who didn't have training, when I asked, where do you get your learnings from? Oh, in the community. In the community where? Well, I go to different events. He had a friend who organizes a lot of church type of educational forums, I guess. And so he tried to make sure that he could get into any of those. And whenever he has questions about things, he actually contacts this individual. So again, not even really knowing where to go.
So you found that, those who were better trained were more willing to give resources
Absolutely.
to, those who came to them,
Mhm.
over those who were not.
Mhm.
One of your themes is about partnerships. Talk a little bit more about how some of your untrained participants, now that we have these trained participants versus
Yeah.
untrained. Talk a little bit more about how your untrained participants, how did they discuss partnerships?
Well, it started out, and I'll just use one in particular. This individual has a lot of he's involved in a lot. I'm trying to talk without disclose, like identifying. So this individual is involved in a lot of community-based activities, okay? Been in the ministry for a very long time, very long time. On the outside looking in, you're thinking this person has it all together. They know this, they know that. This individual actually was one of the ones who asked me, well, can you tell me, where would I find where would I go to identify resources? We deal with a lot of congregants who are dealing with family members who are struggling in one area or another. So can you tell me where the best place for me to go to get some tips? Just get a guide, a guidebook, so I can hand out. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, if you don't know, I mean, again, it just goes to show you. And this individual went to Bible college.
Okay.
This
They were
person went
formally
to,
trained.
yeah, they were formally trained and still doesn't have an idea about some of these things.
I wanted to ask you about the one, I know not to operate outside of my expertise. It's on the same page that,
Yeah, the green one.
yeah,
Mhm.
on that start one. Two parts to this. It kind of goes back a little bit to the first question I asked you, but, did you feel that this would be the norm with your participants, that they would recognize this and be willing to seek out additional help? And if they weren't, did they ever indicate to you what their concern might be for not doing it?
No, they were very willing. It's just not knowing who to go to. If that makes any sense. So they're willing to go out and seek support. They just didn't know where to start. Yeah, yeah. I thought so too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, one there.
Me too. Transformational leadership. One of the parts of that is eventually for kind of self-reliance and that piece. And as you go through your research, it seems like we're looking for the first three parts of transformational leadership, and the other one, self-reliance, is not there at this point. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yep.
In your recommendations for future research, it's slide 23. You mentioned, in these focus areas, you're talking about these strategies to put it into their education at seminary. We now know that some of them did not attend seminary. What can they do now, even the folks that you spoke to? What can they do right now to get the skills that they didn't get in seminary?
There are opportunities for them to take courses. So they can go and enroll in a program that focuses in on mental health, literacy. There's like a mental health, first aid kit, so there are resources out there. They just need to get out there and, well, they need to do some homework because like I said, some of them just don't know where to go. But there are opportunities for them to gain some knowledge. And I do think this experience for them, I appreciated their transparency. They were very willing to, be as transparent as possible, which I thought was interesting. I was expecting something totally different. But they just have to get out there. What I learned through that experience is they don't know what they don't know. And somebody had said, people think that these pastors have it all together. They don't. And this was evident. This confirmed that for me.
Pastors are doing so much for their communities that you've talked about, and it shows up in the research. What degree do you think they need education? Should they actually be able to have mental health backgrounds as well as their position as pastors? If someone's going to come to them for that kind of assistance, knowing that the conditions that they talked about that they were working with are pretty significant and definitely could be problematic for the individual and for the community. So do you see that ever happening for them, or do you think that it just relies on them having a better connection with the mental health professionals that are already there?
So my take on that would be, I think they should at least have, this is just Laretha, have a minimum of a bachelor's degree. Okay, a minimum, at a minimum. For those that don't, because we know that not everybody came up in the church through seminary school, there are some people that I know who used to do other things in the community, but now they're, a clergy leader. And I question how they got there, but anywho, so what I do believe though, in terms of that, if in fact we have those right now in the position that don't have the education, if they were able to put themselves in a position where they can partner with mental health professionals to make sure that they're not missing anything when they're dealing with certain individuals. So there's one church that I mentioned, they do have a mental health, program that's, part of the church. So that's good for that church, but there's so many others that don't have anything.
And really, one of my last questions is about, you talk about in your recommendations to Black clergy leaders, you tell them to get the training. What would you say to the denominations themselves? They have a denomination structure, each one of them, but there's leaders that
Yes.
go all the way up, right?
Yes.
Who supposedly oversee the, status of their particular denomination. What would you say, after concluding this study, what would you say to those heads of those churches, those denominations? What would you say to them about what they need to do from their perspective to ensure not only that there's appropriate training, but that this is a priority at the denomination level? What would you say to them?
First, I would start shame on you, number one. But no, seriously, they need to be held accountable because it starts at the top. And so they need to have some sort of, program or some sort of process, I'll call it a process, whereby when people come into, they need to make sure they go through a thorough training. So if it's someone that's not coming up in, let's say, seminary school, and even in the seminary school, as I talked about, some of them don't have very in-depth mental health programs, curriculum. So in situations like that, we want to make sure that they have something that they can check the box. There's a structure. There's a core structure that they go through and make sure that they check the box on each one. And it should also be a requirement, just like for the Society for Human Resources, SHRM. I have to go through 60 credit hours every 3 years in order to keep my certification. So there should be some sort of requirement from that standpoint for them to be able to maintain their certification as well as a clergy. That's making sure that they're kept up to date with what's going on. Because otherwise, they're gonna cause more harm than good. And some of them said that.
Will your recommendations then be to the hierarchy within the church,
Yeah.
not just the pastor, the
Correct.
clergy that you dealt with? You said take advantage of opportunities to host peer-led roundtables and forums. One thing I was thinking about that, within your recommendations, will you recommend any topics they might cover? Because you sounded as though they were confused and unsure of what they might cover in a discussion like that.
Yeah, I think the first thing they need to cover is where to find resources. I think this should be the first agenda topic, or maybe not even the agenda, but the whole, for that session. This is all they need to focus on right here, is understanding the resources. Yeah.
Okay, no.
All right, my final question. What does this have to do with executive leadership?
Well, transformational leadership is a part of what I think executive leadership. So being a transformational leadership, you're getting out there and you're demonstrating that you have the ability to affect change in a positive way. So in a nutshell, I think that's the connection there. And for those of you in here, so the program that I'm in, it's a doctoral degree in executive leadership. So therein lies where the question came from. But no, it's around being able to affect change in a positive way. And being able to know, when you are not in the right place, to be able to provide insight, redirecting people as appropriate. Just making change in a positive way.
Okay, well, that concludes our questions for now, and we will return shortly. You can all celebrate with her.
So to my folks on the phone, are you all still there?
I'm here. Awesome job, Laretha. I'm so proud of you.
Wait, who was that?
Tina.
Oh, okay. Girl, I'm like, wait, I didn't recognize the voice. Who that?
It was Tina.
My sister said hello.
Hello.
I'm here.
Hello, I'm still here.
I'm
here. Congratulations,
I'm
Larissa.
here. This is
Thank y'all.
Hello.
awesome job, Larissa and McClary.
Yeah.
Uh,
What's that? That's boring.
nah, it's Jaden. It's Jaden.
Oh, Jacob. Oh. Put yourself on mute. Go on mute.
Florida.
All right. So, they're actually going to the next room. They're going to have a conversation and then they'll come back in a few minutes. So, do you all want to stay on and until they come back, it'll just be a few minutes. It's totally up to you all.
I will stay on. This is Tina.
Okay, all right, you can stay on.
We'll stay
I'll
on.
stay on.
Okay, stay on.
How do you feel?
I feel good.
You
I
ate?
Sound good.
started with two different laptops and then I had to get rid of one because I was getting all discombobulated.
Well, you definitely had command of the material and you knew what you were talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was.
Well, Tina, I ain't been doing nothing but this. I had to kick y'all to the curb.
I understand. I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, well, your research and dedication shows, and I think it was really interesting to speak about, unfortunately, our lack of our religious leaders, many of them having the expertise that's needed in order to guide folks to where they need to be. So that was a bit disconcerting, but prayerfully your research, if you are willing to share that with other congregations and that they are willing to make change as a result of that, that would be amazing.
yeah, yeah, so Tina, my hope is that I can get into some of these churches and share this information, with them.
Yes. And their willingness to listen, number one, and create change, because it can be an ego thing too, right? Nobody wants to hear about how they need to do better. Some people anyway.
Well, it's interesting because, those individuals that I talked with, they were very open to it. And so they were asking me really to provide them with some insight on how they can improve. Was there anyone that wanted to go certified as a mental health? Ask the question again. Any of the clergy leaders, those that are not mental health professionals, did they think about going to be certified as a mental health? Well, there was one that actually, based on everything that was going on in his church, it inspired him to become a mental health professional because he didn't feel that his church leadership was providing what the congregants needed. And so as a result of that, that encouraged him to get into mental health.
And are they teaching it now in the seminary?
No.
So that's.
The question was, are they teaching it now in seminaries? And the answer is no. There was one individual who had recently gotten a doctoral degree in theology. And what he said was that there was just one course. It was one course, but it touched on, not the whole course was on mental health, but that one course, they kind of talked about, mental health.
Kind of like in high school where.
Yeah,
we
yeah.
have, Black history, they touched on a little bit,
Correct.
but not necessarily.
And that's what it was. Yeah, that's what it was.
Can you ask them how they see their role, if they see mental health, understanding what mental health is as part of their goals?
Yeah, so the question in the room is, did I ask the question as to how clergy see themselves in their role? And I did, we talked a little bit about that, and so some of them actually talked about the fact that they don't feel that they're equipped. They don't, but again, at the same time, they don't necessarily know who to turn to, where to go. And I think some of that too is because some of them have been in the field for so long, it's like, I'm supposed to have all the answers, but I don't. So who do I go and talk to? And it was almost like, in some instances, I was their sounding board. They were kind of bouncing things off of me to see what I could share with them in terms of helping them get what they need.
Is that because you're in school, so you're doing the research, so now you're gonna have that information?
It was some of that, yep. I do think it was some of that.
Did you find that the pastors who were not educated, that's not part of the didn't have any education? Did you find that those were the clergy that had the least experience, let's say, in helping to guide people through that type of trauma?
Yes and no. So the question in the room was, for those individuals, so I had a mix of people that had education and some didn't have education. So the question was, did I find that those that had education were more equipped or prepared as opposed to the others? And the answer is yes and no, because even some of the ones who didn't have the education, they had the experience. So Joanne, as an HR professional, sometimes experience is more than education. So some of them had the experience, but they didn't have the education. Yeah.
I think it can be traumatizing, though, as the one that said that they didn't feel they were equipped to do it. I can recall a situation I had at work, and you may remember this, where an employee was already in therapy and had a mental breakdown at work. And not only was I the HR person, but I was the boss. I was petrified.
Yeah.
That I might say something.
Right.
That might make her go home.
Yes.
And end her life.
Yes.
It took everything out of me and all of my years to just say the right things.
Yeah.
And convince her, to go and talk with your therapist, try to get some additional help. She was a parent. She felt that she wasn't being a good parent. So I'm a parent, so I was able to talk about that. So I can see a pastor who might be in a situation like that, just not even go as far as I went in terms of helping the person.
Well, it's interesting that you say that too, because I had a situation with one pastor who was actually speaking with a congregant. And they had, at that particular time, he had, resident clinicians coming in and just watching. Okay, so the resident clinicians were sitting in the room. They weren't saying anything, but they were sitting in the room. And so after the session that he had with this individual, the clinicians, after the person left, the clinician said, and the doctor, "Did you see that?" The pastor said, "No, see what? I don't even see what." And so they recognized that there was a period when he was talking to that individual where it was profound and they were having a mental health crisis, but he couldn't pick that up. He didn't pick up on that. He didn't know. So again, and that's the one who said, "I don't operate outside of my expertise." Cause he said, I don't know what I don't know. He said, they're sitting right in the room with me. I missed it.
And that's when it becomes critical.
Yeah, I missed it.
Because if you miss it, you could, like, somebody could leave that room and go home.
That's right.
Hey, this person doesn't care.
Yep.
You know, and, you know, my life is what I believe it is right now. And,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's good too that you talk with them, and the ones that you talk with are willing to, you know, do something, get training, or even go to some of those, seek some of those resources.
Mhm.
I think it's great.
Yeah, they didn't even know where to start. When I tell, some of them had no clue as to where to start. And so they were asking me, like, have you heard of NAMI? National Alliance for, no, what's that? How do I find Mental Health America? Nope, what's that? So they had no idea about some of these resources available to Natasha.
Excellent job.
No,
One
thank
thing
you.
that I wanted to also add to that is the follow-up. Do they follow up after? Like, so you can get all the education, get all of the resources, you're directing them, but what's the follow-up after? How are they following up with
The clergy,
the clergy?
how are they following up with
Yes.
the individual?
Like the one congregation where you mentioned that they do have mental health on site, do they follow up with the individuals
Yes.
after?
Yep.
And then implementing that into the new people. That's
They
what
do,
started. Okay,
yes.
good.
Yeah, so they have the clinicians who actually do the one-on-one assessments. They do the evaluations of the congregants. And then if it's something, depending on the severity of what the situation is, they may do a referral somewhere else. Yeah, so they are following up with them. And then Joanne, your point where you talked about, your situation.
It's bad.
Well, the thing about that is in our profession, being in human resources in particular, we typically refer people to employee assistance program.
Right.
You know, and we know that sometimes that's not even enough. It's just not enough. And then again, some people are not even willing to go that route because of the stigma that's associated with it. And I'll share this. I don't know that I ever shared this with anybody, but I'll share it. I remember, so that whole situation after I had that blood clot, and the doctor that I had at the time, he used to be, whoever's on, can you put yourself on mute? He used to be a bodybuilder, and he turned doctor from bodybuilder. And so this guy, I don't think he knew much of anything about anything. I think he was just brand new. And he's trying to put me on these beta blockers and all of this. I'm like, not doing it. But I think he thought I was crazy because I was giving him a difficult time. I kept pushing back on him. And so he actually said, well, I think you probably need to see a therapist. He said that to me. This was 2002. I think you need to go see a therapist. I think this whole situation has really created a lot of anxiety for you. And I think you might need to go and talk to somebody. So I said, okay, I don't need to talk to nobody. You know what? I'm gonna go. I'm gonna appease you. Because again, he thought I was being very difficult and combative. So I go and I'm sitting on this lady's couch. She, a white lady, she gives me this notepad and then tells me to start drawing. What am I drawing? Well, just reflect back to your childhood and, you know, and so you all know I got up and left, right? I got up and left and never went back. So when you think about therapy, that's what they do. Who is that helping? Yeah, who is it helping? It's not helping anybody. And so I understand why you have some individuals who are reluctant to go and seek out that type of support.
So for the pastors that you thought needed help themselves, what were some of the signs that, you know, oh boy, what am I dealing with for you?
So, well, there were a few. What I would say is, it was almost like they were crying out for help. They just started talking, one thing to whoever is on, can you put yourself on mute? Can you mute yourself? Let me see, I'm about to see. Right.
I don't know. He just does.
Audio. Right, I was just gonna say that.
Bouncing with excitement.
Check participants.
Let me see.
Interesting that. Maybe.
They sure.
Yeah, here's a
I mean, real.
I want to know everything there is to know about financial. Don't worry, I will cover this.
There you go.
Did I move?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You never judge.
So, yeah, so that particular individual, he was just all over the place. When I tell you all over the place, he bounced from the church stuff, then he went to his work stuff, then he went to his wife. He was just all over the place, just all over the place. And, it was like, yo, I ain't bargaining for this, but when I talked about having to remove certain things from, that's what I'm referring to. Cause it was so much stuff that had nothing to do with the study. He was just talking. He needed somebody to talk to. He needed somebody to talk to. Yeah. And he was one of the first ones that talked about clergy needing mental health support. And so I'm like, yep, he's right.
He probably was crying out.
He was. And so I talked to him about employee assistance program. I went into HR mode and I talked about that, and yeah. So I did. Any other questions? They can't answer because they on mute.
I have a question, Laretha.
Go ahead.
Did you notice any differentiation between men and women clergy? Did you break that out in the study at all, just out of curiosity?
So, not really. Not really. What was interesting though, of the two women, one had more than 40 years as a clergy. The other one had less than 10 years, but the other one does a lot in the community. Very, very well connected to the community. Does a lot of community-based events where they bring in not clergy, but mental health professionals. They bring in mental health professionals, and they do like, they give handouts and things like that. So they have tables where they come in, they share information.
That's good. Thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering because there's a large body of research that came out pretty recently about when patients have female doctors, they tend to live longer than when they have male doctors. And I was just wondering, if that parallel exists, far as emotional and mental health in the religious community. So I was just wondering.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. I can see that, but that's not something that I came across in my study.
Yeah, understood. I think the thought is that women tend to listen more and tend to be more nurturers and hear more when someone's saying that they're in pain or agony, And I know I'm not generalizing, but this is what the study says, right? So I was just wondering.
And the other thing too, Tina, is the video that I showed of Susan Moore. Who knows? I mean, she had a male doctor. So who knows if she had a female doctor, if the outcome would have been different.
Yes. That was awful. And that story is all too common.
It is. It is. And like I said, even with my brother, December 13th, 2021, when I went to the hospital, I thought he was dead. I thought he was dead. And
Wow.
so I did. And so I got my niece, Jaleesa, his daughter, the oldest daughter. She came from Charlotte, and she's a medical nurse. Jaleesa's a nurse practitioner. She worked at Strong, which is where he was. Jazz came from Charlotte, And she was dealing with COVID patients down there. So she came to Rochester that Friday. This was on a Monday. By Friday, she got here and she took over everything. Her and Jaleesa took it from there. But, January 21st, he came home, my mom's birthday. He walked out of that hospital. And those two, my nieces, they coached the doctors. They coached the doctors on what needed to be done to save his life. So again, without having advocates like that, we know we lost a lot of people.
Yeah.
We lost a lot of people because they didn't have those advocates.
Yes, yes.
Okay, well,
We don't want to
they're-
interrupt you, but
Come on.
I think we're
Come on.
using that you're welcome.
come on.
No, we're letting you come in. Come on in, Dr. Ryder. We would like to present to you Dr. McCullough.
Yes, praise God.
Wonderful, wonderful. Congratulations.
Dr. McCullough, could you please read your dedication to the group?
Wait, get my camera.
Hold on, wait.
Save them too. Amen.
Thank
Thank you, Jesus.
Oh, look.
First and foremost, I give all honor and glory to the highest for sustaining me through his grace and mercy. Without his divine guidance, strength, and favor, this journey would not have been possible. To my beloved late mother, Minister Lou Esther Robinson, although you are no longer with me in the physical realm, your spiritual presence was felt throughout this process. I am eternally grateful for the unconditional love, values, and unwavering encouragement you poured into me. From the start, you stressed the importance of education and were undoubtedly my greatest cheerleader. Your legacy lives on through every page of this work. To my daughters, Latrice, LaQuanda, and Shayana, thank you for your steadfast belief in me. While others may have doubted me, your faith in me never wavered. To you, I was always the most valuable player. And for that, I love you endlessly. To my grandchildren, Corey Jr., Jaden, Deani, and Justice, never settle for less. Know that you can achieve anything you set your heart and mind on. If you can believe it, you can achieve it. And if you can dream it, you can become it. A huge thank you to Dr. Lyman Torres and Dr. Ryder, the most patient and supportive committee members in the DEXL program. I am deeply grateful to you for the wisdom, the insight, and encouragement you shared with me throughout this journey. Thank you.
Yay.
Okay, so a couple logistics before you can go celebrate. If you all want to start to get yourselves together, right out front of this building is a bell. And it is a bell that we ring, that she will ring, to let the world know that there's a new doctor in the house. It's a big part of our tradition in this program, and so you all want to get yourselves together and prepare to do that. She and I will join you in the next 2 or 3 minutes. We just have to do a little housekeeping.
Yeah, so the bell, go up the stairs right here and go out that door. There's a door at the top of the stairs. And right to the left.
Yep,
There's
the
the
bell is on
bell.
the
There's
left.
a bench and
There's
a
a
bell.
bench, there is a,
Yeah.
all right?
Are you leaving? Oh, okay. Well, I'll see you upstairs.